Welcome friends, welcome back. Today we're not in the kitchen studio, we are in the basement brewery because today I want to brew a very simple beer. I want to show you how you could brew your very first beer. I've built up a recipe here where I've stripped it back to the bare bones. We're going to do a smash, which means a single malt and a single hop. Something very easy. You're not going to have to buy a lot of ingredients. You can get this done very quickly using mostly stuff that you already have in your kitchen or probably in your house. So let's go through very quickly what you're going to need for this. You're going to need a big pot. A big stainless steel pot is great. You can use your stovetop. I have a portable induction stovetop down here in the basement. Normally I would brew on some of this other equipment, but for a small batch like this, a pot is fine. It is filled about halfway with water. So we're going to make a gallon of beer. So we're going to start out with 6.5 liters of water. You need a pot that's about double the size of the amount of water that we start out with because it'll boil and boil over. Next thing you're going to need is a fine mesh bag. And I will, the recipe is always down below, and I will put links to online retailers where you can buy this stuff. But if you have a homebrew store close to you that you can walk into, a bricks and mortar place, please do that. The people in these stores are great. They're there to help you. They'll give you a lot of great tips. Next thing we're going to need is some grain. And so I've got Munich malt here. I think that Munich malt has the flavor that I'm looking for that can stand on its own in a beer. Like, it's going to give you enough flavor and layers of flavor that it's going to be fantastic. Now the grain that I have here is whole, but when you order it or buy it, you can have the store mill it for you and get it already milled. Saves you a ton of steps and saves you from having to buy a grinder. I've got hops here, German Tettnang. No clue why I chose German Tettnang. I think that it will go well with the Munich malt. Who knows? Next I've got a 1 gallon jug, and I've got a bubbler on top. You'll be able to find a jug everywhere. The bubbler is really cheap, easy to find as well. You can get that at most homebrew stores. You can get that at every homebrew store. I've also got sanitizer rinse, and I've got two kinds here. So this is Star San. This is the one that I use most often. It's a liquid. You mix it with another liquid, sanitize everything. But I understand if you don't want to buy a jug of this, it can be fairly expensive. You can get a small bag of dry sanitizer that you mix with water, the same thing. This is probably the most important part of the entire operation. There's so many things in brewing that people tell you that you need to do. In this first brew, I want to strip all of that away. The only thing you really need to know in this first brew is a couple of temperatures, a couple of times, and everything needs to be clean and sanitized. And the last thing is a spoon. You're going to have a big spoon probably in your kitchen. Wooden spoon is fine. Plastic or stainless steel is better. And the last thing I have is my iPad. I have a piece of software on here that I design the recipes on, and it also helps me time out everything. There's a timer on here. It tells me when to put in the next ingredient. Very helpful, incredibly helpful, not needed, because I still take notes on paper. Every brew that I do, I write down in this book, because I just don't trust electronics. Long term, book is the way to go. So now the first step is to put in this little tablet. This is a Campden tablet. I'm using municipal tap water. Our tap water used to be chlorinated. At some point they changed to chloramine. So when the water was chlorinated, you could leave it out overnight and the chlorine would dissipate, or you could boil it and the chlorine would dissipate. When they switched to chloramine, it is persistent. It does not go away. You can leave this out overnight for days, weeks. There will still be chloramine in it. The Campden tablet, there is a chemical reaction that breaks it, blah, 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 blah. You get the point. If you're using municipal water, a Campden tablet is probably a great idea. Your municipality has probably switched to chloramine because it is persistent, it works better, and it is cheaper in the long run. So as the water comes up to temperature, that will dissolve. And also, while we're waiting for the water to come up to temperature, we'll grind the grain. And yeah, I know I could put a drill and make this go faster, but for me, I kind of like the relaxation of doing it all by hand. Our water is at about the right temperature, so I've got the grain done, I'll just get rid of this. I usually mash, and that's the first part of this whole process is called mashing. I usually mash between 154 and 156 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a fairly wide range that you can use for mashing, depending on how you want your beer to be, the body of your beer, the mouthfeel of your beer, how much alcohol you want from your beer. Different temperatures affect the types of sugars and the amount of sugar that you get from the grain. For me, 154, 156 gets me in the right spot. But you always want to bring your pot up a little bit higher, 2 or 3 degrees higher, because when you put the grain in, it's going to lower the temperature. And in this instance, I'm just going to do it in a pot. When you get into brewing, if you get into brewing, you'll do it in a bigger pot, or you might do the mash in a cooler to help you maintain that temperature. In this instance, this cooktop, I can maintain the temperature because I have fairly precise temperature control. But if you're doing this on your stovetop at home, don't leave the stove on. Bring it up to temperature, turn your stove off, mash in with your grain, which is just mixing it in with a spoon, and then cover it over with a blanket. That will help you hold the temperature. And if your temperature drops over the hour that we're mashing, it's not that big of a deal. And stir it in fairly slowly. You don't want to have it clumped together. And at this point, we're pretty much just making a porridge. And once it's all stirred in, I'm going to put the temperature probe back in just so that I can monitor the temperature during this hour-long mash. And I'm going to stick the lid back on just to help keep that temperature in. This will go for an hour. During that hour, I will probably stir it 2 or 3 times with the spoon just to mix it all around and make sure that we're extracting all of the sugar that we possibly can. So set the timer, and I will see you back for the next operation an hour from now. Now, the hour is up, and we did fairly well holding the temperature at around where we needed to be. Now, there's a step that happens now that if I was brewing on my regular equipment, I would do, and that's called a mash out. And I would bring this up to about 171 degrees Fahrenheit with the grain inside. And what that temperature rise does is it stops the enzymes from converting starches to sugars. I don't think it's important on a 1-gallon brew, on your first brew in your kitchen, even your 10th brew in your kitchen if you're doing a gallon at a time. There's the timer. Because I don't think it's important at this stage, I'm going to leave it out. But it is something to think about as you move on. So we're going to take the bag. And the beauty of brew in the bag is I'm going to lift this bag out. I'm going to put a colander underneath, and I'm going to let this drain. And while this drains, I'm going to turn up the heat to start it on the boil. We need to bring this up to a boil for about an hour. So I'm going to start that process. And I'm going to talk to you about something that is controversial. Let me get some gloves. There is a controversy with brew in the bag around this idea of squeezing the bag. And people are afraid to squeeze the bag because they're afraid that you're going to squeeze tannins out of the grain. Tannin extraction is a function of at least 4 things. One is pH, acidity. One is time. One is temperature. And one is pressure. We haven't reached the time in an hour that would extract tannins. We hopefully have our pH in the right range, or the acidity in the right range, and that's something that once you get into brewing, you will check during the mash to see what your pH is. So the pH isn't in the right range for extraction. Time, an hour. And the next function then is squeezing, or pressure. And I gotta tell you, there's nobody on this planet is going to extract or exert enough pressure to extract any tannins. I squeeze all the time, and I've had award-winning beers with squozen bags. So I squeeze to make sure that I get all the last little bit of goodness out of the grains. Get this out of the way. The spent grains are great. You can make dog treats with them. Sometimes I will dry them and I'll put a little bit in my porridge in the morning. But for the most part, they go into the compost. You've got everything out of them that you want. You've got all the sugars out. You've got all the flavor out. If you have a dog, you can make dog treats with them. Lots of recipes, what you can do with the spent grains. But for the most part, they're garbage to me, or compost to me. Give this a stir. Now, This is the point where the app that I use to make this recipe tells me how much sugar I should expect in this pot at this point. And in order to test that, you're going to need a hydrometer. But I don't expect you to buy one the first time out. I definitely don't expect you to buy one the first time out. They're not that pricey, but you know, if you don't know for sure that you're going to be making beer on an ongoing basis, why bother buying this equipment if you don't need it? For the most part, just accept that whatever's happening in there is happening in there. I went from this hydrometer to this, which is a refractometer. I don't even think I can get the package open anymore. This is a refractometer. It is an analog refractometer. I've never really used it all that often because I jumped almost immediately to a digital tool called the digital refractometer, which is really, really accurate, and it's accurate all the way through the brewing process. The analog refractometer is not all the way through. You cannot use it at every step because it just won't read properly once alcohol is present. So I'm just going to take a dropper. I'm going to put it into my digital refractometer. I'm going to let it cool just a little bit, close the lid, and we will take a reading. Our pre-boil gravity is well within specs. We have 1.031. I was expecting 1.033, not too far off. So I'm going to put this stuff away, and then we're going to weigh out our hop pellets. 13.5. Look at that. And there we go. It is just starting to boil. So at this point, we start the timer, 1 hour, and I'm going to put in the hops. I put in all of the hops in this beer all at the same time, right at the beginning. Now this is going to boil for an hour, and it's very difficult for me to say how rapidly it should boil. Everybody that I've ever gone out and done a brew day with has a different idea of how much boiling. The idea is that you want to evaporate some of the liquid to concentrate the sugars. You want to boil it because that helps extract all of the acids and flavonoids from the hops. There's another school of thought that says it needs to boil at a certain level in order to drive off some chemicals that will give you off flavors later in the process or when you actually drink the beer. So I'm looking at it and looking at this and saying, as long as there's a little bit of bubbling breaking the surface and we see some steam coming off, I think that's fine. I've got this process dialed in with my regular equipment. It's a little tougher when I'm working with this pot, and I don't think you really need to worry about it too much on your first time out. When you go to pour this into the fermenter, you're going to see whether you've got too much or too little, and then you'll know whether you should have boiled more or boiled less. It really is sort of a trial and error thing. As much as brewing is a science, it is as much an art. So while this boils, I've got an hour on the clock. I'm going to go over here to my cleaning station. I've got some kegs that I still need to clean and get cleared out. I'm going to clean up the mess from the first part of the process, and I'm going to clean and sanitize everything for the next part of the beer that we're brewing today. The 1 hour of boiling is up, and I've got everything that we need from this point forward sanitized. It's very important from the point that you turn it off the boil for the rest of the procedure that everything is sanitized. You don't want any other yeast or bacteria getting into this wort from this point forward, because that'll ruin your beer, or it could ruin your beer, or it could make an incredible beer. There have been some happy accidents where something gets in there and it turns it sour, and it just turns into the most amazing beer that you've ever tasted. I am going to, so this is my dropper, I'm going to sanitize it to make sure. I'm going to check the opening gravity, it's called, and that is the sugar content of the wort. What we need to know is how much sugar is in this liquid to know if we're in the right spot, to know if we've boiled it enough, to know if we've done everything correct up to this point. I have an expected gravity, but knowing this gravity now and then testing it at the end after it's fermented is going to let us know our alcohol content. And for some people that's important, for other people they don't care. I'm expecting our end alcohol content to be somewhere between 4 and 5%, so not a really heavy beer, just something light to drink for your first time. So let's see where we are. Okay, 1.047. I was hoping for 1.045, so we're just a little bit over. I don't think that's a huge deal. Now we need to chill this down as quickly as possible, which is going to be difficult your first couple of times because you're not going to have some of the equipment that I have. I use usually this stainless steel coil, which I would put into the pot or one of my bigger brew pots, and then pump cold water through it. And that chills it down really quickly. In about 10 minutes, I can chill down about 5 gallons of wort to somewhere around 55 or 56 degrees Fahrenheit. Some of the other things that people use are these. This is a plate chiller. Again, same sort of idea. Water and wort passes by each other in here. They're separate, of course, but they pass by and they chill very quickly. I'm going to suggest you just take this pot, put it into your sink in the kitchen, and run cold water around it, or put cold water and ice around it. Keep it circulating. Keep a spoon that you have sanitized, and stir it every once in a while and bring that temperature down as quickly as you can. It's not going to be that easy, but you want to get it down to somewhere around 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit for this operation for the yeast that we're going to use. We're just going to put the lid on so that nothing falls into the pot. The wort is chilled and everything else is sanitized. So I'm going to take our 1 gallon jug here and pump out the sanitizer. And you're going to notice that inside the jug there's going to be a lot of foam. Don't worry about the foam. It's fine. Even though this is a sanitizer and it kills bacteria and yeast and everything else, in the concentration that's left inside this jug, it's not going to affect the yeast that we put in. You just have to trust me on this. It's going to be fine. So I've got this sanitized funnel, and we're just going to pour the wort into our fermenter. And you don't have to be overly gentle when you pour it in. You want it to gurgle a little bit. You want to get some oxygen into the wort. Even though fermentation is an anaerobic process, and from pretty much tomorrow to the end of the process, you don't want any oxygen. At the beginning, you do want oxygen. The yeast, as they first start to get going, they need that oxygen to get going. So often what I'll do when I'm making beer in a bigger batch is I will use a pump, and I will pump it into the fermenter from a height so that it splashes a lot and we get a lot of oxygen built in that way. I also have an oxygen tank with a little stone that I will put in, and I will pump pure oxygen into the wort. Lots of different ways of doing it, but really, your first time, it's not a huge deal if you don't get it right. Another thing is, down at the bottom here, it gets a little bit filled with stuff. That's called trub. And that is stuff that's left over from your hops and proteins that come out of the wort. Two schools of thought with that. Like everything in brewing, there's two schools of thought. Some people say don't put the trub into your fermenter because you want it as clean as possible. I did that for a long time. Other people say you want to put the trub in your fermenter because the trub provides nutrients for the yeast. About halfway through the number of brews that I've done, I started to put the trub in, and I realized it's fine. My beers actually taste better since adding the trub. So I pretty much put it in, although I won't go any higher on this fermenter than this because it will start to bubble up. So there is, I don't know, there's maybe 150 mils of liquid left in this pot. Not a huge deal. So I've put our yeast in to sanitize the outside of the package, sanitizing our scissors as well. Now this is a dry yeast. This is Saffale US-05. I would suggest that you start with a dry yeast your first couple of times, mostly because dry yeast is less expensive than liquid yeast. And this one is very forgiving in the temperature range that it will ferment at. And it's also very forgiving in that it doesn't give off a lot of off flavors if your temperature goes out of range. And temperature control is something that you don't really worry too much about it right now. We're just going to do it at room temperature. So there's enough yeast in this package to do 5 gallons. I would suggest that you don't put the whole package in. I would suggest you try to get a fifth of the package in. If you can, if you get a little bit extra, don't worry too much about it. It's not a huge deal. Just get it in there and just eyeball it. It doesn't have to be perfect. There we go. I'm going to say that's enough yeast. I would just give it a little bit of a swirl just to make sure that the yeast is wet and it starts to mix in, which it has. And now deep in here is the bubbler. This is an airlock. Where's the other piece? Oh, that's cold. So this is an airlock. It's going to let CO2 escape without letting any oxygen get back into the bottle after the fermentation starts. So that just goes in the top. There we go. Now I'm going to sit this somewhere out of sun. It doesn't have to be completely dark. You could put it in a closet if you wanted to. I would put it in a bucket just to make sure that if it does bubble over, if you do get fermentation that happens really strong, it's not going to ruin your carpet or ruin your floor. And let it go for 2 weeks. So I will see you again in 2 weeks. It is bottling day. So for bottling day, some help is really probably necessary. It makes it a whole lot easier. Now this has fermented for 2 weeks. Being that I'm putting this out there as your first beer, your first 1 gallon beer, I wouldn't bother testing the sugar levels. I wouldn't bother getting a hydrometer and going through that whole process, because by the time you fill the vial for the hydrometer, you've thrown most of your beer away. So it's best...
Just hope it works out.
You just hope it works out. So after 2 weeks, it is fully finished.
Well, I like that you've got faith that there's 6 bottles worth here.
I don't think there are.
Okay.
No, definitely not. But it's better to be over-prepared than scramble. It's better to be over-prepared than scrambled. So we've got a big jug of the cleaning solution. You want to put your bottles in, fill them completely, and then drain them out. You don't need to rinse your bottles, and it's okay that there's foam or bubbles inside the bottles. Completely fine. Everything needs to be cleaned and sanitized, except for the next step. And this is the part that is a little bit crazy. You need to put in priming sugar.
Oh yeah, that's got to stay dry.
And it's got to stay dry. So your funnel and your measuring spoons, you just kind of have to...
Hope you did a good job last time you washed them.
You just have to hope. So if I was doing this as a 5-gallon brew, I would mix this with water, boil it, and then put it into the 5 gallons and mix it all the way through. Make sure that it's completely mixed in. But because it's only a gallon, you have to kind of, again, close your eyes, cross your fingers, and hope. So this is priming sugar, which is dextrose. It is a simple sugar, which is what yeast really like to eat. You could use any sugar you want. There are online sugar calculators or priming calculators. But the problem with other sugars is that they can bring a flavor, and you don't want to add a flavor at this point. Or at least with this beer, I don't want to add a flavor. I just want to carbonate, reactivate the yeast in the bottle to carbonate. So while Julie puts in the priming sugar, in here I have the siphon. There will be water. You will get wet. It'll be okay.
Do you want me to do all 6 or just, whoops?
Yep, do all 6.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, now we can remove the airlock. And slip the siphon in. You just want to make sure that your siphon doesn't go into this layer of yeast and trub at the bottom. You don't want to get any of that, or you want to try not to get any of that in your bottles. It's going to happen. Okay, so Julie's got the siphon. This is a siphon with a little kind of a pump on it, so you can pump it up and down to get it started. So you want to put your tube right to the bottom of your bottle. At this point, you want to make sure that you're not introducing air. You want to introduce as little air as possible. Mm-hmm. It's going to happen. Nothing you can do about it. So put it right down to the bottom. You don't want any turbulence while the bottle is open. Give that a pump a couple times here, Jules, to see if we can get it started. Once it's started, it should go. There we go. And the bottle is filling. And I've got a little clip here that'll stop it. I'm using swing top bottles. Probably the easiest on your first time. You can scrounge these.
Ding, ding.
Just okay. You can scrounge them. There's quite a few overfilled. Overfilled. Not a big deal.
Don't go far though.
Nope.
Okay, it's probably time to start figuring out how to.
There we go. Talking while bottling. It's a problem.
And you know, the second one's always easier, right?
So you can probably scrounge these. You know that they're safe. You don't have to buy a bottle capper and bottle caps, which adds to your expense the first time. And chicken wants to be part of the brewing. After this one.
Oh, my goodness. That's not what I was expecting. Okay, I need to, okay, I'm all good. Good, ding. Maybe you could help me out with the...
Okay. There you go.
I'm Mr. Acrobat here. Do you want me to tilt this at all?
I would tilt it a little bit, yeah.
Keep it out of the... That one, I would probably label that one as being the one that probably has...
Trube?
Trube. Little.
Oh, you know what? I'm gonna cap that and let it go.
I would just label it with a T or something, just so you know.
Well, it's halfway.
Oh, yeah, it's obvious.
So these are going to hang out for 2 weeks to allow a little bit of fermentation, which allows it to carbonate.
Sorry. Oh, you're just going to put, okay, go for it.
Just put it in there. Which will allow it to carbonate. So 2 weeks, room temperature, and then put it in the fridge to chill it down, and we'll do a tasting.
I don't have enough hands.
Okay, Jules.
Oh, you're going to taste it first? I thought you were going to test first, but okay. I guess tasting is a test. Smells okay.
Yeah. Once that's cold and once it's carbonated, it'll be pretty good, I think. It's a little on the bitter side right now because it hasn't finished.
Yeah. But yeah,
I think we're on the right track.
It's on the right way hey, well done, my friend.
So hang tight like 2 seconds and we'll be back for tasting.
Hey, Glen, I think that ham will go well with the beer.
The ham is looking really good, but still a few more months to go. Now, I've got a couple bottles of beer, and I brought a rag.
In case we have a little too much carbonation?
Yeah, so one of the things is that when you first start making beer, you may screw up in the amount of sugar that you put in for carbonation, and if it overcarbonates, you'll get a geyser. And we never really put stuff in bottles.
We always go with the kegging because it's simple and we've got the stuff.
Yeah, we move very quickly to kegging. But let's see what happens.
Oh, sounds good.
Sounds good.
Success.
Excellent. So we have beer. It's carbonated.
And it had it's got, some bubbles. How many bubbles? We don't know. You're pouring very carefully, I see. Doesn't look like a lot of bubbles.
No. So we're probably undercarbonated. Which is okay. Oh no, it's good. Look at that. It's going to be cloudier. You're going to have a bunch of yeast on the bottom. It's okay to drink the yeast. Some people swirl it in because they like the flavor. Some people try to leave it in the bottom of the bottle. But it smells like beer.
Smells like beer.
It's a little bit cloudy. It's not overly carbonated, so I did miscalculate the carbonating sugar.
So what do you think, a third more sugar?
Maybe a third more sugar.
We put in 2.
One of the things is I was erring on the...
I forget what we put in.
I forget what we put into. I'd have to go back and look at my notes. But I erred on the side of caution because I didn't want a geyser. And I think that's, when you're first making it, something you should do.
It tastes like a slightly flat beer. But it's a very good beer.
Oh my.
It's got a lovely flavor to it.
It's got great flavor. Mm-hmm. So a little more carbonation, and that would be
I'd be bang on.
That would be kick-ass beer. So
the next time, put a little more sugar when we
bottle
the
condition,
bottle and we're good to go.
Bottle carbonate. So
Gallon in your kitchen.
let me get the book and I'll give you the numbers. So we hit most of our numbers the whole way through. And what I mean by hit the numbers, when I built the recipe, I wanted to get to certain points, and we hit them all the way through. And so, let's see, what's this one? The Munich Smash. We ended up with 4.7% alcohol by volume, which is,
Pretty standard.
pretty standard for a beer. The flavor's good. And I think for first beer, this would be excellent. Our first beer wasn't this good. It was a long
time ago. I'd have to go back and look at our notes.
It was a long time ago.
We did have some real duds in the first
and
few
you're going to experience that. But
you're surprised? There's $5.
$5. Where did I get $5 from?
Although the age of the bill suggests how long we've been fussing around with this.
That Canada doesn't even use paper for money anymore.
Yeah.
So you're gonna get duds. You're gonna end up with beers at the beginning that don't work out, and your first beer might not work out. But what you have to discover from the first beer is, do you like the process?
Yes.
That's really.
Do you enjoy the act of making beer?
Yeah. It's not a money-saving thing. You're never gonna save money by making your own beer, because you're gonna end up with a basement full of equipment.
Stuff. It's the stuff. It doesn't have to be expensive stuff, but it's still stuff. I also want to point out the importance of taking notes.
Yes.
Both with making beer and with anything that you're doing at home, like jam, jellies,
Anything
preserves.
in the kitchen.
Take notes, because it's months later or weeks later when you actually get to taste it, and you're like, and if you don't take notes, you can't remember.
You can't remember. You can't go
a
back
year
to
later
it.
when you do it.
So what I've tried to do with this recipe, and I know there's going to be a lot of people leaving nasty comments that I didn't do this right. I know how to brew beer. We brew a lot of beer. We've brewed some really great beers. What I tried to do with this recipe is make something that was super simple, that anyone could do at home using mostly stuff that you already have in your kitchen. At most, what you're going to have to buy for this beer is a packet of yeast, a little bit of grain, and a mesh straining bag. Pretty much everything else you should already have at home. And don't worry about a lot of the stuff that goes around beer, people telling you what you need to do and what you should do. If you just follow a simple pattern, you're going to get something that's drinkable, that's really good.
And then once you realize you like it, then start investing in pieces that make it easier.
Then you buy all the little pieces of equipment that make it better, or make it easier, or make it... But,
and then you get crazy traditions like us saying, it's Boxing Day. It's time to start making the lager for summer. Because it needs that cold winter weather.
So you can do this in your kitchen. You can make it a gallon at a time. It's very simple. You don't need a lot of stuff. And you end up with something that's, I'm thinking this is pretty tasty.
I'll probably still drink it.
So thanks for stopping by. See you again soon. The flavor's good.